What if I told you that one of the poorest nations on Earth, without vast armies, billion-dollar aid packages, or foreign consultants, managed to inspire its people to rise up with nothing more than brooms, shovels, and an iron will? This is not a legend, not a myth. It happened in Burkina Faso, a landlocked country in West Africa, and it began in September 2023. Over 30,000 ordinary men and women, farmers, soldiers, students, and elders, stepped away from their daily lives and united for a mission that no outside power asked them to do. They cleaned their own streets, schools, hospitals, and marketplaces. But this story was never just about sanitation. It was a declaration of ownership. It was about a people saying, "This land is ours, our future is ours, and we will take responsibility for it." The spark came from a young leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, whose words carried weight not because of empty promises, but because they rang true to the heart of his people. And while he had taken power in a military coup, an event that rightly causes concern, his first major act was not to fortify his own authority, but to awaken the power of his citizens. Burkina Faso is ours. It is our duty to protect and uplift it. That call was not broadcast as a command. It was received as a challenge to dignity, a reminder of something too often forgotten in our world: that ordinary citizens, united by a sense of justice and belonging, can achieve what governments and international aid often fail to deliver. And here's why this story matters to you, even if you're sitting thousands of miles away in the United States. In an age where division, dependency, and distrust dominate headlines, Burkina Faso's grassroots movement offers an uncomfortable but vital lesson. Strength begins with self-reliance, and national security is built first in the streets and communities of everyday people. It is a lesson that resonates with the very core of the American narrative: the power of a community united in purpose to forge its own destiny. In this video, we explore the untold stories of nations fighting for dignity, independence, and survival. If you believe these stories deserve a place in history, not just in footnotes, but in memory, then stay with me until the end. Because the journey of Burkina Faso may just change the way you think about leadership, power, and freedom itself. In September 2023, Burkina Faso witnessed something few outside observers could have predicted. For one full week, more than 30,000 citizens put aside their work, their studies, and even their military duties to join in a nationwide cleanup. The effort stretched from the capital city of Ouagadougou to the most remote villages. Farmers arrived with wheelbarrows and shovels. Traders closed their market stalls for a day to sweep public squares. Soldiers stepped out of their barracks to work side by side with civilians. Children picked up brooms in schools while their teachers encouraged them to take pride in their surroundings. In hospitals, doctors and nurses not only treated patients, but rolled up their sleeves to disinfect hallways and waiting rooms. President Ibrahim Traoré set the tone with a message that spread across radio and television. Burkina Faso is ours. It is our duty to protect and uplift it. The immediate results were visible everywhere. Markets once clogged with refuse gleamed with order. Drainage canals that had been blocked for years suddenly flowed freely. In villages long forgotten by public services, elders saw streets cleared for the first time in decades. Health officials soon reported drops in waterborne illnesses such as cholera and diarrhea. To many, it was not just a cleanup, it was a rebirth. But numbers and reports do not capture the deeper meaning of those 7 days. What made this movement historic was the spirit that bound it together. A retired soldier in his 60s described the feeling. "I spent my youth carrying a rifle. This week I carried a broom. For the first time, I felt I was fighting not against my own people, but for them." His words echoed the sentiments of thousands who discovered dignity not through protest or violence, but through collective action. The act of cleaning became a symbol. Each swept street was not merely free of dust, but a reminder that no foreign agency was needed to reclaim the nation's pride. In a country where aid organizations have long dictated the terms of development, the sanitation campaign demonstrated something far more powerful: self-reliance. For many Burkinabe, it was a direct rejection of the idea that progress must be imported from abroad. Observers also noticed a shift in the relationship between the people and their government. Typically, public campaigns in Africa are perceived as orders from above, enforced by fines or soldiers. Yet here the movement spread voluntarily. It was not law but loyalty that moved people into the streets. The fact that Traoré himself appeared in person, seen on national television sweeping alongside ordinary citizens, cemented his image as a leader of action rather than words. In a region plagued by mistrust of authority, this symbolic gesture carried immense weight. The unity of classes was equally striking. Farmers worked beside bureaucrats, imams beside teachers, women beside soldiers. For 7 days, Burkina Faso was not divided by occupation or status, but united by purpose. This solidarity recalled earlier moments in African history, when newly independent nations sought to forge identity through collective labor. Yet, unlike those fleeting initiatives, this campaign was not imposed. It was born from a call to dignity that resonated across generations. As dust clouds rose from the sweep of brooms and the rumble of wheelbarrows echoed in city streets, something greater was happening beneath the surface. Burkina Faso was not only cleaning its environment, it was cleansing decades of dependency, neglect, and resignation. The young who had grown up in poverty saw, perhaps for the first time, that their own hands could change the face of their communities. Elders, long skeptical of promises from leaders, felt a flicker of trust as they saw words matched by deeds. And yet, behind the celebration, an unspoken question lingered. Was this truly just about sanitation? Or was it the first rehearsal for a larger struggle? A test of whether the people of Burkina Faso could unite not only against trash and disease, but against the far more dangerous forces threatening their nation's survival. The sanitation revolution reached its emotional peak not in statistics or government announcements, but in the lived experiences of ordinary people. In the bustling marketplaces of Ouagadougou, women formed cleanup brigades, their voices rising in song as they swept away years of dirt. The sound of brooms against stone mixed with traditional rhythms, turning labor into celebration. In classrooms, children proudly scrubbed chalkboards, carried away trash, and cheered as their playgrounds gleamed. For them, it was not just cleaning. It was a chance to prove they too could contribute to the nation's renewal. Elders stood in awe. Men and women who had watched their villages decay under decades of neglect wiped tears from their eyes. Some whispered that they had not seen their towns look so alive since the early days of independence. For a generation that had endured disappointment after disappointment, this was more than sanitation. It was redemption. At the center of it all stood Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Unlike many leaders who remained distant, issuing orders from palaces, he appeared in the streets with broom in hand. Cameras caught him bending low, sweeping dust beside farmers and schoolchildren. A young volunteer explained it simply. When the president holds the broom, you cannot stay at home. For a people long accustomed to leaders who demanded sacrifice but gave little in return, this image was revolutionary. The moment carried echoes of history. Older Burkinabe recalled Thomas Sankara, the iconic leader of the 1980s, who once urged citizens to plant trees, build their own infrastructure, and depend on themselves. His assassination in 1987 had left a wound that never fully healed. To many, Traoré's actions felt like Sankara's spirit reborn, a continuation of a dream cut short too soon. The unity startled observers abroad as well. Neighboring Ghana, Mali, and Niger sent delegations to witness the movement firsthand. They saw markets restored, hospitals cleaned, and communities united across divisions of class and religion. Some quietly admitted they wished their own nations could inspire such trust between citizens and the state. For the international press, the images were striking. A country too often associated with poverty and terrorism was suddenly displaying hope, order, and pride. Yet the campaign's most profound impact was felt along the northern borderlands, where terrorism had driven families from their homes. In these regions, the presence of soldiers sweeping streets and clearing wells carried a significance beyond hygiene. Communities that had once seen the army only in combat now saw them as partners in rebuilding daily life. A village elder near Djibo put it plainly. When we saw the soldiers help clean our wells, we knew they would also stand with us against those who poison our land. For families traumatized by extremist attacks, that moment of solidarity was a turning point. It suggested that the fight for survival was not theirs alone. This blending of civic duty and national defense gave the sanitation revolution a second layer of meaning. A broom became more than a tool of cleanliness. It became a symbol of resilience. Every swept street said, "We are not powerless, we are not abandoned." For the first time in years, citizens felt that their government was present not only with guns, but with hands willing to work beside them. Inside Burkina Faso, the emotional wave was palpable. Mothers told their children that a broom could defend dignity as surely as a rifle defended borders. Priests and imams reminded congregations that unity was as sacred as prayer. In markets and mosques, in schools and barracks, the same message echoed. The people themselves were the guardians of the nation. But behind the joy lay a sobering truth. No broom could erase the economic hardships, and no wheelbarrow could sweep away the threats of armed groups. The real test of this newfound unity would not be in a single week of sanitation, but in the struggles that followed. Could the people who cleaned their streets together also defend their villages, their sovereignty, and their future? As the final day ended, drums and songs filled the air, and citizens celebrated with pride. Yet, even in that celebration, a question lingered in the background. If 30,000 citizens could unite to reclaim their environment, could they also unite to reclaim their nation from the forces that threatened its survival? The celebrations that closed the sanitation week were not an ending, but a beginning. After 7 days of brooms, shovels, and unrelenting energy, the people of Burkina Faso had tasted something they had not experienced in decades: the power of unity. The question lingering at the end of Task 3, could this spirit extend beyond cleaning, was answered almost immediately in the months that followed. Captain Ibrahim Traore made the first move. Standing before a jubilant crowd, he announced that the campaign would not be a one-time event. Instead, it would become a national tradition. Every month, citizens across the country would gather for a National Sanitation Day. His words were met with applause, but more importantly, with action. From 2023 to 2025, the movement did not fade. It grew month by month into a new national rhythm. The results were visible in public health. Hospitals that once overflowed with patients suffering from preventable diseases reported steady declines in cases of diarrhea, cholera, and malaria-related complications. Doctors noted that cleaner surroundings reduced both infection rates and stress for medical staff. Rural villages regained access to potable water from wells that had been unclogged and maintained, saving countless lives. A nurse in the town of Kaya described it simply, "We used to fight disease with medicine we could not afford. Now we fight it with cleanliness we can provide ourselves." But the greatest change was not medical, it was psychological. For too long, Burkina Faso citizens had lived with the belief that their government was powerless and their communities neglected. The sanitation revolution shattered that resignation. People began to see their own agency. If they could clean their markets, why not organize them better? If they could disinfect hospitals, why not protect them from collapse? Civic confidence surged, and with it came an appetite for broader responsibility. Politically, the implications were profound. Traore's decision to work shoulder to shoulder with ordinary people reshaped his image. No longer seen as a mere soldier who seized power through a coup, he became the face of participatory leadership. Citizens who had once mistrusted authority began to view the government as a partner rather than an oppressor. This subtle but powerful shift redefined the social contract. Instead of demanding change from above, people began to expect change to emerge alongside them. The ripple effects touched every sector. Teachers reported that their students became more attentive to civic lessons. Parents said their children were reminding them to keep neighborhoods clean, even between official cleanup days. Market associations organized their own rotating squads to maintain order, proving that the movement had cultivated lasting habits. In effect, the cleanup sparked a cultural transformation. Responsibility became a matter of pride rather than obligation. And yet the most surprising outcome was in the realm of national security. Extremist groups had long thrived in Burkina Faso by exploiting communities that felt abandoned and neglected. But when citizens experienced tangible improvements in their daily lives, their allegiance shifted. A father from the Sahel explained it bluntly. "If we can defend our homes with brooms, we can defend our villages with vigilance." In fact, in several rural towns, the spirit of sanitation soon expanded into community defense. Villagers began organizing night patrols alongside their monthly cleanup duties. What started with brooms turned into a culture of vigilance. A local teacher explained, "We realized that if we can protect our children from disease with clean water, we can also protect them from extremists by watching our own streets." The sanitation revolution was not only about health, it became the seed of a broader movement of self-defense and self-determination. International observers could not ignore this evolution. To some in Paris and Washington, it looked like the rise of nationalism that might threaten established influence. To others across Africa, it looked like a blueprint for resilience. A model in which communities, once passive recipients of aid, became active guardians of their own survival. Burkina Faso was still poor, still under threat, still fighting insurgents. But something fundamental had shifted. People had proof that they were not helpless. They had seen with their own eyes that collective action could improve their lives, strengthen their villages, and even bolster their security. And once a people discover their own strength, it is almost impossible to convince them to return to silence. The question, however, remained open. Would this new civic energy stay confined to sanitation and security patrols? Or could it evolve into something larger? A force that might redefine governance, reshape politics, and alter the balance of power in West Africa itself? The rise of community self-reliance in Burkina Faso did not stay hidden within its borders. What began as a broom and bucket movement soon attracted the gaze of distant capitals. From Washington to Paris, from Moscow to Beijing, powerful nations watched closely, not because of trash heaps removed, but because of what the movement symbolized. A people proving they could stand without leaning on foreign powers. European media were the first to applaud. Newspapers in France, Britain, and Germany ran stories calling the Sanitation Week a blueprint for civic renewal. Public health experts in Geneva hailed it as a low-cost model for developing nations. The United Nations praised the campaign as proof that grassroots mobilization could achieve what expensive aid programs often failed to deliver. For the first time in years, Burkina Faso was in the headlines not for terrorism or poverty, but for innovation and unity. Yet, beyond the applause, unease grew in Paris. France had long maintained influence over its former colonies through aid, trade, and security partnerships. A voluntary, self-reliant movement suggested a dangerous possibility that Burkina Faso might be slipping out of France's shadow. French commentators even noted the parallel with Thomas Sankara, whose rejection of French control in the 1980s had unsettled Europe until his assassination. In Washington, official statements were polite, emphasizing health improvements. But behind closed doors, analysts recognized a deeper shift. A nation that learns to solve its problems without foreign assistance is also a nation less vulnerable to outside pressure. What troubled policymakers even more was Burkina Faso's growing alignment with Moscow. Russian officials praised the sanitation revolution as evidence that African dignity needs no foreign masters. The Kremlin hinted that such grassroots energy could pair naturally with Russian offers of security assistance. Meanwhile, Beijing played a subtler game. Chinese investment in West African infrastructure expanded quietly, with officials framing it as support for self-reliance. Unlike Western aid, which often came with political strings, Chinese projects presented themselves as practical partnerships. To many African leaders, this combination of grassroots mobilization at home and Chinese financing abroad looked like a path toward independence from traditional Western influence. For the United States, the parallels were hard to ignore. Men and women who remembered the Cold War could see the contours clearly. Once again, small nations at the margins were becoming arenas in a global contest. The question for Washington was simple but urgent. If movements like Burkina Faso's sanitation revolution spread across Africa, would the continent align itself more with Moscow and Beijing than with the West? The Broom in Burkina Faso was more than a cleaning tool. It was a signal to the world that Africans were ready to define their own future. And in the quiet halls of power in Paris, Washington, and beyond, that signal sounded less like a celebration and more like a warning. The international reactions were divided, but inside Burkina Faso, the meaning was clear. The sanitation revolution was not just about hygiene. It was about reclaiming history itself. To understand why this mattered so deeply, we must turn to the memory of a man whose shadow still looms large. Thomas Sankara. Sankara, often called Africa's Che Guevara, led Burkina Faso in the 1980s with a radical vision of self-reliance. He urged citizens to plant millions of trees, to vaccinate their children without waiting for foreign aid, to reject corruption, and to take pride in their identity. He famously declared, "We do not need aid to stand upright." But his bold defiance of external control earned him powerful enemies, and in 1987 he was assassinated. For decades, Burkinabe whispered that his dream had died with him. Yet in 2023, when Ibrahim Traoré joined his people with broom in hand, something stirred. Citizens murmured, "Sankara has returned in spirit if not in body." The symbolism was impossible to miss. A young leader in fatigues calling his people to action, preaching dignity through work, and refusing to wait for outside saviors. This was Sankara's legacy, reborn for a new generation. By 2025, the connection had solidified. Monthly sanitation days were no longer just events of cleanliness. They were rituals of memory, moments when citizens redeemed a fallen dream. Religion and tradition deepened this transformation. Imams in mosques reminded the faithful that cleaning their streets was as much an act of piety as prayer. Pastors told congregations that order in the home and community reflected God's order in creation. Traditional chiefs wove sanitation into festivals, blessing villages after each monthly cleanup. In this way, the revolution gained a moral weight that extended beyond politics. It became both civic duty and spiritual calling. The results by 2025 were undeniable. Public health improved dramatically. Fewer outbreaks of cholera, cleaner water, and healthier children. Schools reported higher attendance since children were less frequently bedridden by preventable illness. Markets, once chaotic, became centers of order and pride. Elders said they had not seen such unity since the first days of independence. Politically, the revolution solidified Traoré's legitimacy. No longer just a young officer who took power in turbulent times, he was seen as a servant leader who delivered visible change. Unlike so many African presidents who spoke from palaces, Traoré occasionally appeared in dusty streets, sweeping alongside his people. That image mattered more than any speech. It told citizens that leadership was not distance but presence, not command but example. Regionally, the echoes spread. In Mali and Niger, similar campaigns began, though smaller in scale. Leaders there quietly admitted that Burkina Faso had offered a model, a way to inspire people without foreign consultants or endless promises of aid. Development organizations, somewhat embarrassed, noted that community-driven efforts were proving more sustainable than multi-million-dollar projects imposed from outside. And yet the greatest lesson was not about health, politics, or even economics. It was about dignity. The people of Burkina Faso had rediscovered that progress was possible with their own hands. They had seen that they were not condemned to dependency. For them, every monthly cleanup was more than a fight against dirt. It was a declaration we own our future. Which brings us to the next question, the one that concerns not only Africa but the world. If 30,000 citizens with brooms could reclaim their nation, what lesson does that hold for nations far wealthier, far larger, but often far more divided? The sanitation revolution of Burkina Faso is more than a story about cleanliness. It is a story about leadership, dignity, and the power of ordinary people. Captain Ibrahim Traoré captured its essence in his closing speech when he told his people, "We may not have riches, but we have hands to work, hearts to care, and hope to dream." Those words cut through decades of dependency. They reminded Burkina citizens that wealth is not only counted in money, but in resilience, solidarity, and pride. By 2025, the sanitation revolution had given proof. A poor nation, often overlooked, could achieve what the richest aid programs could not: unity. But this is not just an African story. For Americans listening today, especially those who remember an earlier era of civic duty, it carries a familiar echo. There was a time when neighbors looked out for each other, when communities took responsibility for their streets, schools, and traditions. Burkina Faso's revolution reminds us that such spirit is not lost. It can be rediscovered if people are willing to act. The broom in Ouagadougou was not only a tool of sanitation, it was a weapon of dignity. And here's the deeper challenge. If 30,000 citizens with brooms could transform their nation in 1 week, what might 300 million citizens do if they rediscovered their own unity? That question is not just for Africa. It is for America. It is for every country where ordinary people wonder whether their voice still matters. In this video, we keep these stories alive, not as forgotten headlines, but as lessons for our own time. If you believe that freedom is fragile, but also that it can be renewed through courage and unity, then stay with us. Reflect with us. Carry these stories forward. Because the legacy of Ibrahim Traoré, the people of Burkina Faso, and this African movement for dignity belongs not only to Africa, it belongs to anyone who still believes that ordinary people can change the fate of a nation.